Here's our top story this morning. The Prime Minister is in Germany today, where we'll have one-on-one talks with Chancellor Olaf Scholz. The trip is the second half of Rishi Sunak's defence tour. He was in Poland yesterday with NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg, where he announced a major boost for UK defence spending. Here's what he had to say.
I believe we must do more to defend our country, our interests and our values. So today I'm announcing the biggest strengthening of our national defence for a generation. We will increase defence spending to a new baseline of 2.5% of GDP by 2030. That starts today and rises steadily in each and every year. Over the next 6 years, we'll invest an additional £75 billion in our defence. And it will be fully funded with no increase in borrowing or debt.
Interestingly, the only person to discuss this with is the excellent defence editor of The Sun, Jerome Starkey. Jerome, good morning. Can I just put this in my own words? We have been talking about this for months. The situation in the world. I'm desperately trying to get to your article without anybody seeing that I haven't got there yet, but you've actually got it there. We've been talking about defence. Penny Mordaunt's been talking about it. The chiefs of staff have been talking about it. And yet I just want to draw attention to Eddie, right? A viewer, straight away in response to what Nick and I just said about is it too little too late. Eddie says, and to think the Tories' favourite line used to be there is no magic money tree. Turns out there is, just not for us, the British taxpayer. You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't if you're Rishi Sunak. But I would say that this is a massively important announcement. Thoughts?
It is a massively important announcement. It may not be the last, so there's a risk that this may not be enough, and that's worth considering because it does feel like a huge quantity of money. But this is the amount of money that Boris Johnson pledged to spend on defence 2 years ago. It's the amount of money that Rishi Sunak has been promising for at least the last year to spend on defence. But of course, he hasn't said when. He said...
Why now, do you think, in your opinion? Election?
Well, I suspect there's a lot of complicated calculations, but of course there's sort of domestic UK politics feeding into this. And there's every chance that Rishi Sunak isn't going to be Prime Minister next year, let alone by 2030, when he promises we'll be spending 2.5% of GDP on defence. So by doing this, though, he may have one eye on his legacy, because he's effectively holding the opposition's feet to the fire on this. Labour has already matched the previous 2.5% promise. They've said that they will they will increase defence spending to 2.5% when resources allow. It was the same idea. Labour say when resources allow. Rishi said when economic conditions allow. But now he's put a timeline in. Now he's said how long it's going to take, when he's going to do it by, and that's by 2030.
So your headline in The Sun this morning, page 10 of The Sun, it says, PM Rishi Sunak may have just saved your life. Can you tell us why you chose that headline?
Yeah, of course, because ultimately this is about defence. This is about keeping us safe. You safe, me safe, our viewers this morning safe. It really comes down to that. And it's easy to get distracted because, you know, a lot of this money might go on expensive whiz-bang kit and ships and tanks and soldiers. But the reason we invest in those people and in those capabilities is for national security. And the reason we want national security is ultimately to deter conflicts. This is about making sure we're strong enough that the UK's enemies, and they do exist, we need not look further than what's happening in Ukraine. We want to ensure those enemies are deterred from dragging us into a shooting war.
And I think that's the point, and poor Nicola's probably bored of me saying this, as are the viewers, but being dragged in is the argument that we've been having for months, because there are people with war fatigue in this country who are struggling to pay their bills, who would go, hold on a minute, as Eddie said. But people have to understand, do they not, that Ukraine war, one step outside Ukraine, if Putin wins, and that's a NATO war, and then we're involved. And thus, I mean, interestingly, overnight, the Congress finally cleared that £95 billion package for Ukraine and Israel. In terms of Ukraine, that will provide ammunition, it will provide the logistical chance to fight back against the Russians. So it is our war. But you would understand the people that would go, this is massively important. This is a Tory policy, strong military. But why has it taken them so long, would be my question.
That's a good question. And I would also understand the people who think that, you know, the cost of living has gone up. The NHS has long waiting lists. You know, they might not be able to get their children into school, into the, you know, the right schools because of, you know, waiting lists and demand. this is money that's going to come away from something else. There is no magic money tree. There has been no.
Do we know where it's
significant
coming
boost.
from at all,
There's some suggestion it might come from cuts to civil service jobs. I've seen that reported today, but there wasn't. I didn't see it explicitly explained yesterday. I mean, crucially, the latest numbers that came out on government spending showed that borrowing was slightly up, interest rates are sticky. So actually, that means the UK is going to be spending more on its interest payments at the moment. There's no headroom. There's no obvious headroom either for a tax cut or for a spending hike. So you're absolutely right. Why now? And the short answer is nothing has changed. But it's no good saying when economic conditions allow when it comes to defence, because without defence, you don't have those other things. You don't have education. You don't have health, and you just need to look at what's going on in Ukraine. Look at the schools, look at the hospitals.
Look what happened to the cost of energy and the cost of wheat and all those sorts of things because of that conflict. Absolutely right.
Perhaps it's because political conditions allow. People will be all too aware of what's happening in the Middle East, what's happening in Ukraine, and it feels like, you know, to be cynical about it, perfect timing for him, really, to be introducing something like this.
I couldn't agree with you more, Nick. There's definitely, Jerome. I mean, absolutely. Let's take to the one side that it's about our security. There's an election in a matter of months. This is absolutely playing to that red wall Tory vote they need.
Yeah,
it is.
You look at their social media campaign they did, was it last week or the week before, where they were like, Britain is, you know, the second best country at all of these different things, and it was fighter jets, and they were using very much this kind of...
I think it's great.
It's a push for patriotism, isn't it? Announced on St George's Day as well. I'm not saying that it's not necessary.
No, it is necessary, and you have to be cynical, but it's massively important, isn't it?
It is hugely important, and we've also seen Labour making a big effort to show themselves as serious and tough and credible on defence. So Keir Starmer committing to that 2.5%, insisting that his party backs
that
the
would
nuclear
never have
deterrent.
happened in the old days, would it? I mean, that's a massive thing as well. Talk about, I mean, I use that phrase, you know, parking your tanks on somebody else's lawn. The Labour Party is saying all the right things, and I like your phrase about, in a way, if he thinks he's not going to win and it's his legacy, he's holding their feet to the fire, because Starmer has no room for manoeuvre over that, does he?
He doesn't. I mean, but it's important putting it in context. If this goes ahead, if Rishi Sunak's plan comes to fruition, it will get us back to roughly where we were in 2010, 14 years ago, when the Conservatives came into power. At that point, the UK spent 2.47% of GDP on defence. It has tumbled over the last 14 years while we've had this or various Conservative governments.
Austerity, of course, the cuts,
power.
the pandemic and all of that, yeah.
It's now creeping up. It's now at about 2.3%, due to hit 2.5 in 6 years. But nonetheless, it shows that we have massively reined in defence spending. We've reined that spending in partly because the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have come to an end, and understandably people might say, well, we're no longer fighting two expeditionary campaigns, expensive campaigns. But at the same time, what has happened is instead of facing the prospect of wars of choice, which ultimately, however valid you may believe those conflicts were, they were wars of choice, we're now facing the threat of existential conflict, which we need to prepare for.
Do you think it will be enough, 75 billion over the next 6 years?
I think a lot will depend on how and what it's spent on. My big fear is, unfortunately, with the Ministry of Defence, billions of pounds get wasted, projects overrun, expensive pieces of equipment fail to do what they were supposed to do, and require patches and fixes. That's not a reason not to do it, and that's one of the points I try and make in The Sun today. That's not a reason not to do it. It's a reason to do it better. And I know there is a determination to try and do it better within the Ministry of Defence, but we've heard that plenty of times before, that they're going to cut the waste. And that's what this government's saying. That's also what Labour is saying, is that they're going to try and cut the waste in defence.
Hopefully a step in the right direction. The money can be spent wisely and we can become more secure. But I think you're absolutely right. For whatever reasons, the timing is the timing, but it can only be a good thing moving forward. Jerome, as ever, thank you so much. Jerome Starkey.